They told you to work hard, study, get a job, climb the ladder, endure 40 years of meetings, deadlines, stress, and sacrifice. Because someday at 65 you'll be free to travel, free to rest, free to live. But something feels off. You look around and see the ones who followed the script. They made it to 65, and they look hollow. They're not traveling. They're not resting. They're waiting for something that never comes. This is the great betrayal of modern life, the promise of purpose after decades of servitude, the illusion that retirement is a reward. Carl Jung warned us about this kind of psychological fraud. He saw it not as a financial trick, but a spiritual crisis. Most people spend the best years of their lives avoiding who they are. They don't live, they perform. Retirement doesn't fix that. It only removes the stage. And what's left when the performance ends? An identity built on a job title, a self-worth based on productivity, a life measured in paychecks. We call it freedom, but it feels more like exile. Because the truth is brutal. You weren't preparing for freedom. You were preparing for silence. And in that silence, people collapse. Not because their bodies are old, but because their souls were never allowed to grow. You were told to wait for happiness, to delay joy, to suppress curiosity, to ignore the deep, aching question, is this all there is? The tragedy isn't that people die at 65. It's that they stop living at 25 and wait 4 decades for a miracle that never arrives. This is not about money. It's about meaning. And Carl Jung saw what society refuses to admit, that a life of unconscious obedience leads to a death before death. So we have to ask ourselves, why are we still following a map that leads to nowhere? If you wake up tired, you're not alone. But it's not your body that's tired. It's your soul, worn thin by a system that was never built to nourish it. The modern world is a machine, and you are its fuel. From childhood, you're conditioned to obey. Sit still. Follow orders. Don't ask why. School isn't about learning. It's about training. Training to accept monotony, to suppress imagination, to trade your curiosity for compliance. By the time you enter the workforce, you're already broken. And you think working 9 to 5 is normal. You think burnout is a badge of honor. You think exhaustion means you're doing something right. But Carl Jung saw deeper. He called it a collective neurosis, a shared sickness of the soul. We've created a society that rewards sleepwalking, where your value is measured by output, where you're expected to be available, efficient, replaceable, and the system doesn't just want your time, it wants your identity. You're no longer a person. You're a role, a cog, a commodity. The jobs change, the titles change, but the structure stays the same. A structure that funnels your life energy into someone else's profit. And here's the secret most never realize. The system needs you tired. It needs you distracted. It needs you just comfortable enough not to rebel, but just stressed enough not to think, because thinking is dangerous. If you had time to reflect, you'd ask questions, you'd seek purpose, you'd wake up, and the system cannot survive that. Jung believed that every individual has a unique self, a voice buried beneath all the noise. But to hear it, you must become conscious. And consciousness is rebellion, so it keeps you moving, from job to job, from bill to bill, from Monday to Friday. And before you know it, decades vanish, and you're left wondering where it all went. But the system doesn't care. It got what it needed. Your attention, your obedience, your years. And now, it offers you retirement. As if that will restore what was stolen, it won't. Because meaning isn't something you stumble into at 65. It's something you must fight for, every single day you're alive. Carl Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But most people never get close. They live on autopilot. They follow scripts written by others. They become what's expected, a good employee, a responsible citizen, a polite stranger, but not themselves. They go to school, they get the job, They raise the family, and somewhere along the way they forget who they were before the world told them who to be. Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. It helps us fit in, it helps us survive. But over time, the mask becomes the face and we lose sight of the inner self, the part of us that questions, dreams, rebels. That part doesn't die. It waits. In silence, in symptoms, in depression, anxiety, restlessness. Jung believed these weren't illnesses. They were signals, warnings from the unconscious, that your soul is being buried alive. Because life isn't just about survival. It's about integration, becoming whole. But the modern world doesn't teach wholeness. It teaches conformity. You're rewarded for fitting in, not for being real. You're praised for sacrifice, not for self-awareness. And this is why so many people feel lost. Not because they lack goals, but because they've never asked, who am I beneath the noise? Jung saw this crisis everywhere. In businessmen, in housewives, in scholars, people who had everything except themselves. They worked hard, they followed the rules, but they never truly lived, because they never truly knew who was living their life. Jung warned, if you don't confront your unconscious, it will control you, and you will call it fate. This is the tragedy of the modern adult. They mistake repetition for purpose, routine for identity, and comfort for meaning. But deep inside something knows, something remembers, that you were meant for more than this. And until you face that truth, until you risk peeling off the mask, you'll keep waiting for life to begin. But life doesn't begin at 65. It begins the moment you stop pretending. Obedience looks safe. It looks noble. It looks like the right thing to do. Do your job. Follow the law. Respect authority. Don't question. Don't disrupt. Don't dream too loudly. But there's a cost. Not one you see on your paycheck, but one that bleeds quietly from your soul. Carl Jung warned that blind obedience doesn't make you moral. It makes you unconscious. And when enough people become unconscious, society turns into a machine, efficient, productive, and utterly hollow. You obey your boss. Your boss obeys a board. The board obeys the market. And no one stops to ask, obeying what, exactly? We call it civilization. But what happens when civilization rewards passivity over passion? When it silences truth-tellers and promotes yes-men? The cost is not just personal, it's cultural. Art dries up. Education becomes indoctrination. Work becomes ritualized suffering, and the most obedient among us are praised, not because they lived well, but because they never made anyone uncomfortable. Obedience kills originality. It buries instinct. It shrinks the human spirit until all that's left is a worker, efficient, exhausted, replaceable. Jung believed the individual must stand against the collective, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Because the crowd doesn't seek truth, it seeks comfort, it seeks sameness. It punishes whatever it cannot control. And here's the tragedy. Most people don't even realize they've surrendered. They think they're being responsible. They think they're doing the right thing. But inside, they're aching for something real, something raw, something true. You don't see the cost of obedience on day one. You see it after years of silence, when you can no longer hear your own voice, when your dreams feel childish, when your laughter sounds foreign. And by then, it's almost too late. Jung's work wasn't about rebellion for its own sake. It was about consciousness. And consciousness requires risk. The risk of being misunderstood. The risk of being alone. The risk of disobedience. Because the alternative is a life lived on someone else's terms. A life of quiet despair, masked by routine. You were not born to obey. You were born to become. There's a quiet moment that hits some people around age 60. A pause in the noise, a breath between decades. They sit alone, maybe in their favorite chair. The job is over. The kids are grown. The calendar is empty. And for the first time in years, they hear a question they've spent a lifetime avoiding. What was it all for? They sow. Paycheck is gone. The applause is gone. Even the responsibilities are gone. But so is something else, themselves. Carl Jung believed the greatest tragedy is not death, but waking up too late. Spending your life chasing goals that weren't yours. Fulfilling duties that buried your desires. Being so busy doing what you were supposed to do that you forgot what you wanted to do. By the time most people retire, they've given the best years of their lives to a system that never cared. They followed the rules, they sacrificed, they waited for the reward, but when the reward arrives, it feels hollow. Retirement isn't freedom when you've forgotten how to be free. It's not peace when your soul is starving for meaning. And this is what Jung feared most, the unlived life. Not the failures, not the mistakes, but the life you could have lived, the self you could have become. You can't buy that back. You can't reschedule your 30s, you can't relive the moments you traded for meetings and deadlines. And the worst part? Most people don't even get a clear answer. There's no obvious villain, no moment where it all went wrong. Just a slow fade, a quiet drifting away from themselves, until the mirror reflects a stranger. They say wisdom comes with age. But Jung would argue, only if you dare to confront your life honestly, not with nostalgia, not with regret, but with the question, did I truly live? Most avoid that question, because it hurts, because it's too late to undo the choices, too late to start over, too late to become who they were meant to be. But here's the truth, Jung whispered to those brave enough to listen. It's never too late to wake up. But the longer you wait, the harder it is to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. So ask yourself now, while there's still time, are you living? Or are you waiting to begin? Carl Jung didn't speak in slogans, he didn't give easy answers. He didn't tell people what they wanted to hear. He told them what they needed to confront. And this was his final warning. If you don't face your inner world, your outer world will always feel empty. It won't matter how much money you earn, or how much praise you collect, or how many years you survive. You'll feel the hollowness, because no achievement can substitute for a self you've never met. Jung believed that each of us carries something sacred, a blueprint buried deep in the psyche. He called it individuation, the process of becoming whole, not perfect, not successful, but real. To get there, you must go inward. You must face the shadows, the repressed desires, the forgotten dreams, the truths you were told to ignore. You must break the persona, peel back the layers of who you've become, and risk discovering who you truly are. It's not easy, it's not safe, and it's not quick. But it's the only way to escape the machine, to stop being a cog in someone else's purpose, to stop waiting for permission to be alive. And if you're thinking it's too late for me, Jung would disagree. Because the soul has no deadline. The self doesn't retire. It waits. Sometimes for decades. Sometimes until the very end, but it never stops calling. You hear it in the quiet, in the moments when the noise fades, when the distractions wear thin. It's that small, steady voice that says, there is still time. Time to wake up. Time to realign. Time to stop surviving and start living. You don't need a new life. You need a new relationship with yourself. This is Jung's message, stripped to its core. Don't wait to live. Don't hope that age will bring meaning. Don't trust the world to define your worth. Turn inward, face the truth, and become who you were always meant to be. Because if you don't, you may spend a lifetime working, obeying, performing, and still end up with nothing that truly matters. Not because you failed, but because you never began. So if you're waiting for the right moment to live, stop. This is it. Because the tragedy isn't working until 65. The tragedy is never becoming who you are. Even once. If this message stirred something in you, don't ignore it. Reflect. Reclaim your time. And if you found value here, share this video with someone who needs to wake up before it's too late. Subscribe for more insights that challenge the world and bring you back to yourself.